Hey, welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and today's workshop is all about forms. So we're going to look at three different types of forms you can use in Appsmith, and then we're going to check out when to use each one and the pros and cons. Then we'll look at how to add validation to your forms using both the built-in widget properties and the more advanced method using an external library like Validator.js. And then lastly, we're going to check out how to embed your app into another website. So you can add a contact form or some other public facing app that collects data and embed that into your existing site. So first, let's start out checking out the three different types of forms in Appsmith. Okay, first we're going to check out the regular form widget. And I'm starting with an app that has a single query and a table already connected, just so we have some data to work with. I'm skipping past setting up a Postgres data source because we have a few tutorials on that already. So check out the link in the description if you aren't familiar with setting up a Postgres data source. I've got a single query here, getting back some records, and I have that connected to the table widget. So if we look at the table widget here, it's showing the data from that get tasks query. And that's it. That's all I have so far. So next, I want a form to edit this data. When I select a row here, I just want a form next to it to where I can edit a couple fields. And then we'll look at the JSON form and then table row editing. So to connect a form, first you want to drag in a form widget. And this is similar to a container widget in that it's one of the few that can hold another widget that you can put more widgets inside of it. So a container will let you do that, and a form widget. But other than that, you can't really stack any widgets. So this form, we just added an input, and I want to connect this input to the name here from the table. So for the default value, this is what's getting displayed here in this input before the user edits it. It's the default value that will appear as soon as the page loads, and this form will be pre-populated with whatever you put here. So instead of that being a hard-coded text there, we'll use the double curly braces or mustache syntax so we can use JavaScript. And then I'm going to reference this table widget, table one selected row dot name. So I'll get that name property from the row that's selected here. And then you can see as I pick a different row, it's pre-populating the form with that one row. Now, if I change some data here and go to the next row and come back, it's not persisting. It's not saving that anywhere yet, but it's at least pre-populating with that field value. So we'll do the same thing with a select widget here for the status. So I'm going to drag in a select widget. Now this, instead of being a default value that's just a string here, you'll have some data connected. So if we look at the select widget's source data, it's this array of values, and there's the label version, which is just a single capital letter, and then the code on the background. It's in the back end, it's going to be saved as all caps. This is just an example that comes with the select widget, but your data should be in the same structure that when you provide it to the widget. You should have something to use for the label and something to use for the value. The property names here don't have to be label value because you've got this selector here that says, which property do you want to use for the name? Which property, to connect to the value. So I'm just going to do a couple of these real quick in review, and you don't have to have different values. It could be the exact same for the label and the value. But sometimes you want like an email and then a user ID, or the ID and then like some text string that's more readable. So let's see, complete. Okay, so we have a drop down where we can pick those values. And if I switch to a new row here, that one is not updating because we didn't change the default value. I only changed the options, the available values. So then down here for the default, we can say that the default is new, so that when you're creating a new row, if it was a blank form, it would always default to new. But in this case, where we want to edit a row, so just like this other field here, we're going to use the mustache syntax, reference table 1 selected row, and then this time it'll be the status. So now that is following the selected row, but it's still not persisting when we change it. So follow that same process, drag in all the widgets into this form container here. Also make sure that you update the labels, that's for the end user, and the name of the widget. So the way that you name it, that's how you're going to reference it in code later, like this. And it gets confusing when you've got input 1, 2, 3, whatever, or if you copy an input and then you've got input 1 copy, copy 2, copy 3. So name these specific to the use case so that when you're not looking at the canvas and you're just in the code editor part, it's easy to tell what they're all connected to. I like to use a prefix, 3 or 4 letters like input, and then this one's name. And then I have a select widget here. So I'll call this select status. And then the labels. So the name up here is the one that you're going to see when you're writing your code and referencing it. The labels for the end user. Okay, and then this one will set the label to status. And I'm gonna do one more field. We're not doing the entire form or every field in this table. Let's see, name, and we'll do text, I think is the long text field. It's called text, there it is. What we want to do here is connect this to a query that'll capture the values from this form, and when we click submit, actually save that back to the database. So let's go back to the query now. And here I've got the select or the get tasks query. I need to add one to insert records now. And there's a few different ways to do it. You can go here and just say that you want a new query and then pick that data source. Or if you go view the data source. So here's the data source and I'm looking for that tasks table. And if you select here, then there's a few different options. You can generate a whole new page. This will do all 4 queries for a CRUD app. So I'm going to do them one at a time, but do check out this generate a page feature. That can save you some time. So we'll do new query. And then it starts out giving you just a select query, just like we had before. But there's also some shortcuts here. So let me pull up that tasks here again. And you'll see that we can change this to an insert or update. So the select format's pretty easy, especially if you're just selecting all with the asterisk. But if you are updating records or inserting, there's that whole list of fields that you would have to type out. So I like to use this shortcut because it just looks at the data, it figures out what the field names are, and it writes this whole query for you. So I'm going to name this update task. And we don't want to update every field. We definitely don't want to update the ID. So it puts in every single column name here just by default. What we're doing is just the status, the name, and that text field. And you would never want to do an update to update the ID. That's the field that you use to identify it. So what we'll use here then for the where clause, that's how we'll actually find it. This is the condition to actually find the row we're trying to update. So we'll say where ID equals, and then take that value from the selected row. So we're inside a SQL editor right here, and we can't write JavaScript directly. Got to open the curly braces or the mustache syntax, and then I can reference the table selected row and get its ID. So we're going to update the row that matches the ID of the selected row in the table. Go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this. I think the back end is stamping the modified time for me. So there's just the 3 fields that I want to update, and then the condition to find that row. So we're almost there. Now we got to connect the values from the form that I just made. So here you can see that it's substituting in that selected row, and it is a 6 here for the ID. It's going to check the ID column against that, so that part's good. I got to do the same thing in each one of these other fields. So again, start the mustache syntax, and we're going to take the value, but this time it's not coming from the table. The new edited value is in that form. So if we look at the form itself, there's form1.data. And so inside of here is a list of all of the widgets that we've added. There's the input text is right there. So I want the name, and that's going to resolve here. If you look at the evaluated value, it's just .data and then the name of the widget. And then that is putting in the value that's been entered in the form there. So I'm going to take that same approach here, and we get form1.data.status. And the text, input text, there it is. Okay, now notice that here on the ID, I'm using the curly braces before I can reference the table, but there's no quotes around it. And all these do have quotes. So inside of this, JavaScript's going to evaluate and return something. If that thing is a string, it's not going to put quotes around it because the quotes aren't in the string. They're something that signifies everything else inside there is a string. And so the ID is a number, and we want to do that comparison without the quotes. But up here, we're checking a string against a string. And so this part, it's going to pull in that string, but it won't have any quotes around it by the time it resolves and gets inserted here. So you use single quotes on these values that you're inserting and double quotes on the column name. Kind of going off on a tangent here. That's not so much forms, that's SQL, but we should be able to run this now and update our data. It looks like the text field's blank, but it does have the status and the name there. So let's go back to the form. And when you click submit, we want to connect this to that query that we just wrote. So the form itself, you can see the properties change here. There's the form, and then there's each individual widget. You want to go to the form properties, or rather the button itself. So we want the on-click for this button. Go right here to the on-click event, and I'm going to select the update query first. We want it to update the row, and then there's these callbacks. So if I click submit, this would update the row in the back end. And if I go check it here in Supabase, I would see the change. I would not see the change here on this table. For that to actually update after you click submit, you want to run the get query again to repopulate the table. So callback on success, and we'll run the get tasks query. So now I should be able to throw something in here. Let's see, we are changing this one. I'll change it to complete. There's a few versions of that one, but let's go ahead and submit this and see if that changes this row. And it did. It looks like I've got 3 different statuses here now, where I had 2 that were in review there a minute ago. So we're able to update a row, the selected row here, but what if it was a brand new row? So like right now it's side by side. Here's the row I've selected. You can edit it right here and click submit. If you want to do a new row, one, you'll probably want a button outside of the table because it's not specific to that certain row. So we'll have a button here to add a row, or a task rather. And then you would have a modal pop up. The easiest way to do this is a modal, or you could use another page of the app. But I'm going to take the on-click action for this button and tell it to show a modal. And then you select the modal, and if you haven't added one yet, you can just add a new one right here. So this creates a new modal for you, and it's connected it to that button. Okay, so I have somewhere to put a form, and basically you do the same thing we just did here. I'm going to copy this form, and let's make some more room here on the modal. I'm going to turn off auto height so I can spread this out here. And we'll paste the form in here. Okay, so we have our own submit and reset button that's part of the form. So I can delete the buttons that come with the modal. And now we have this form 1 copy. Like I said, anytime you're referencing your stuff in the JS editor, you're going to get confused at what's form 1 or 2 or copy. So name these. I'm going to call this form update, or new rather. This one's new in the modal, and the one on the table is for updating. And so we'll head back here. Let's name this one form update. And then that should update in your query. So if you look back here where the references are to those fields, it's changed the name there as well. So we're able to update a row, creating a new one. I'm not going to walk all the way through that. Just wanted to show it's basically the same approach. It would just be a create query instead of an update, and just reference these widget names instead of the original ones. So same process. So next we're going to look at a JSON form. So I'm going to delete this form, and we will add a JSON form here instead. Now what this does, instead of having to drag in each individual field, you can just reference some data, pass in an entire object of data, and that'll generate the form for you. So if you click generate form and connect it to the table widget, you'll see that that's all you have to do, and it's going to update when you select a row. Now, what it's done here, if you look at the JSON form properties, there's this source data, and if I change it to JS, you can see that it's just referenced the selected row. The original form that we looked at, every single field was connected to table1.selectedRow.fieldName, and then the next input and the next input, and you'd have to bind all of those individually. Here, you're just giving it the one object, and then all of these inputs are automatically generated based on the data type. It knows that these are dates, so it's using a date type for the input here. It knows when certain ones are a number, like this ID here. It's got a number input to change the value, but you can change all of those. You can override that stuff at a per column basis. So if you look at the JSON form field config here on status, I can go here and change this to a select instead of a text input. And again, it's looking for that list of values. Not going to update this again this time because we already saw how to do that. But the one difference I want to point out, though, is with a select inside of a JSON form or a table widget, like we'll see here in a few, you do need it to say label and value for the property names, because it doesn't have those extra fields to connect it, to say my label is called code or my value is called key or whatever you're using. So that's a newer feature on the select widget, but the JSON form and table haven't had that updated yet. So you might notice the missing settings or the different property names. So as a best practice, I like to just always use label value so it works everywhere. All right, so we've got some data here in this form, and we could save this back in our query. Let's go back to that update query. And so you can see that the references here to my old form are not working now. Let's clear this out and start over and connect it to our JSON form this time. And before I clear this last one, look at the format. There's the name of the form, .data, and then the name of the individual input widget that was in that form. Now with the JSON form, it has, instead of .data, it's form data or source data. because individual widgets have their own data binding, but with a JSON form, that data, it's at the entire container level, the entire form itself instead of per widget. So there is the source data that pre-populates the form, and then there's the form data that the user entered, okay? Source data, that's what is updating this form every time I select a different row. That's the table. Sorry, let me select the JSON form here. So the reason that this updates every time I select a row on the table is because the field, let me back out to the top of the JSON form here. There it is, source data is coming from table 1 selected row. However, once the user changes something here, that is not in the source data. The source data is still coming from the table widget. So you want form data. Form data is the one you're saving back to the database. So right here, let's look at JSON form 1.form data. There's also field state that'll show you if it's been edited. And then inside form data, again, you've got the name of each individual input. So there's name, and I can see that it is evaluating to that new value I just typed in there. And so we'll use the similar syntax here for each one of these. Only this one is status. And text. Okay, so again, I'm getting those individual fields and connecting it to the property name here. And then I'm using the same condition. The selected row of the table, I want to take its ID and send these values to that row. Now, let's take a look at the back end here. Looks like that last edit did work here. Let's try one more. Okay, so on number 5, it is currently new. Like I said, I didn't change these values to actually match our data, but let's try setting number 5 to green here and see if this works. So same situation here. We want to connect the submit button. That's part of the form itself. That's another small difference. With the normal form, the form has one set of properties and the button had its own separate widget properties. On the JSON form, that submit button's built in. And so the setting for it, the on submit, is part of the JSON form settings instead of the button. So for on submit here, I'm going to update the record again and run the callback to repopulate the table to get the tasks. So number 5, setting that status to green. Let's see what happens. And we got our first error. Let's check out what it says here. Query execution error. Invalid value. So it actually failed to update, not because of the Appsmith side, but because on the back end, that status field is set to an enum. It'll only allow certain values. So we'll go to this status here and into the column settings for the JSON form. Let's just change this one to complete. So we've got at least one valid option here. And now we should be able to run that one. Okay, so if we look over here, number 5, new, it just changed to complete. So that's the JSON form. And then the last way that you can edit data is with the tables inline row editing. So you can add or edit rows directly from the table widget. I'm going to remove this JSON form now. And next thing you want to do is enable editing for the entire table. And that'll do all the columns at once here. But then you're probably going to want to turn off the ID. Things like created at or modified, you want that to happen automatically and not let the user make up a time that they created it. So things like that you'll want to disable or maybe just make certain fields hidden in the form. And then for any that you need to change into a select widget like we did earlier from the JSON form, this one right here, it looks like it's taking plain text right now. So we can go to the status field of the table, go to its settings, change it to a select widget again, just like we did in the JSON form. And then you have to give it some options. Um, in this case, it's not giving us the pre-populated example, but I can just, I'm going to use curly braces so I get the color syntax highlighting, but you could just type in an array without that. And then you have to give it objects with a label and a value. And you should have at least one of these. And then each one will have its string. So let's do new. And then we want to have just a few of these objects. In process. Okay. So now the table has that same type of dropdown. Just like before, it's not going to persist and save that value unless we connect this save button. So just like with the JSON form, the save or submit button is part of the overall widget, the form or the table. Whereas with the regular form widget, the buttons are their own widget. So little subtle differences there. But on this table widget, we want to change the settings for the save button. And that's just one of the new columns here. So when you enable editing, it adds this save discard column and the settings are right here. And so I'm going to set the on save action just like we did with the first couple examples. We want to update the row and then run the query to repopulate the table so we can see the change. So now I'm setting number 2 to complete. It was in review. Okay, let's go ahead and test this. I don't think I connected the query to the table widget. No, I didn't do that part yet. So we're not ready to save. Back to the query. I deleted the JSON form. Now we got to connect each field here to a table widget. So the table has a selected row. It also has a new row property once you enable that row editing, or an updated row. So let's see. Table 1 dot updated. There it is, updated row. And then inside of there is going to be the same type of property names. So we're just going to take this first part, table1.updated row, and swap it out with the object where these previous fields were coming from. Okay. And then you can see it's pulling values from the row that's in that edited state that has not been saved yet. So if we look back here, this discard button is available because this row is in this draft edited state. So let's save this and see what happens. We're looking for number 2 to go to complete. Okay, no error. And number 2 looks like it is in review now. What happened? So that's weird. We got no error, but it didn't save. Let's try one more. Complete, save. 2 is complete. Okay, maybe because I had the row in a half edited state when I connected the query. Number 2 is complete now. Okay, yeah, just a weird glitch there for having the row in a draft state when I connected the query, I think. So 3 different ways that you can create or edit data is that regular form widget, the JSON form, or a table widget. You could also use a custom widget, and that opens up tons of options and all kinds of libraries and different UIs. So that could be 100 other types of forms that you can make there. But as far as creating or editing records, those are the big 3 that you can use. There's also individual widgets, like you could just push a button and have it add a new row if you hard-coded a bunch of values or pulled it from the user's email. So there's kind of some edge case stuff there as well. So the next thing I wanted to look at is validation. So let's go back to using that side-by-side view here. And I'm going to use a JSON form again. We'll connect this to the table so that each row we select here is updating the form. And then let's see, let's work on maybe the text field. Since this one's open text, the first thing you could do is just make sure that they enter something to make it required. So you'll notice the submit button is available right now. If I change this required field to on, the submit button is gone and this field is red. So if I put anything in there, it's good. Well, now maybe you want to have a minimum or a maximum characters. Max is pretty easy with a text one. If you choose a number type, let's change this to a number, then you'll see that the type of validation that's available, it's different based on the field type. So because I've chosen number, now there's a min and a max. Most of them have this regex option as well. So you can put in a regular expression here and make sure that the text matches that. Let's change this data type back to text. And let's see, get back to the validation regex. Here it is. So this will check for a certain phrase and make sure that something's in there. Like if this was an email, say we wanted to make sure that it matched the pattern of an email. So here's a real simple regex that looks for a few things about an email. It's looking for word characters or a dash, then the @ symbol, some more characters, and then you got to have a dot and some kind of domain, and it's at least 2 characters, and then the upper limit is open. So it could have, any number of characters in the TLD. So if I have my @ symbol here, some more characters, a period, 1, 2. Okay, so it's good. And it doesn't care how many, it just has to fit that pattern of a character or more, the @ some more characters and a plus, and the dot. So that's like a really basic regex validation. If you need something more advanced, or you're trying to do something like a phone number or credit card, or anything complex like that, then you can use validator.js. So the next way we're going to validate this is we'll take this library here. I'm going to copy the URL. So I'm using this min.js library from JS Deliver. And there's also ESM format, but I'm using the default min.js version. And we'll come over here to the libraries on the sidebar here, the little cube, add a new library and paste in that link and install it. And then you'll see that the library has been installed and it's available as validator. So back here on the form, let's look at the validation. We'll get rid of the regex one. And this time we're going to use an expression to say if this text field is valid. So here you could do anything you want. I could check that the appsmith.user email, make sure they're entering their own email if you wanted to check it this way. I could say make sure it equals the JSON form. I'm inside the form, so it's not coming up in the autocomplete. There it is. Form data text. Okay, so it's false. Now it's true because it matches my user email. So here in this valid, max characters is very specific. It's like only looking at the length and nothing else. Regex, it's also really specific depending on what your particular regex expression is. And then here, it's just any kind of JS you want to write. So instead of checking it for my email, we can use this validator library now. And inside this validator, there is all of these different functions. Most of them are Boolean, like is this thing something true or false? So I'm going to use is email, and then pass that the value from inside this JSON form, form data text. And so this is returning true because I have my email right here. If I take out that @ symbol, it's invalid, and we can see this is false. So this is going to be way easier. You don't have to write any regex. So there's a bunch of other features in here. You can test if something is a credit card or currency. Just use the autocomplete or the docs, and you can see all the different methods that are in here. So this is going to be way more robust and able to check for, certain types of characters or length, and without having to think about it. It'll just know the right type of data, and you pass in the value. So that's for more advanced validation. Usually just the built-in features of each widget are pretty good, and that's going to have some options for most use cases. But if you really need to, that validator.js library should be able to do anything else that you need. So the last thing we want to look at is how to embed a form in a public site. Okay, so I have a real simple, like boilerplate website here, and we want to embed Appsmith as a contact form. So the only part you really need to do is like figure out where in your code that you're trying to embed this. Put a div around it or whatever you want for styling. And then here I've got a section for my contact form, a div, and then just this one line for the iframe embed. You really don't even need the other stuff around it, but just for looks and to be able to like give it a border or padding or whatever. So figure out where you want that in your site. And then you just paste this one line here. You can copy it from the docs. Here we go. So under the public embed section here in the docs, somewhere in the body, you just need an iframe tag. There's a couple extra properties here like scrolling and seamless, just to make it display and fill the width 100%. And then you put the URL for your app right here. And I'm using an app that has a contact form. So let me pull that up. Okay, so I have this simple app with a contact form, and I want to embed this into my site. Now, if you look at the share modal here from the user side when you're in deploy mode, all you see is the option to share it with somebody else. But if you go to edit mode and then to the share modal, so as a developer in the share mode, you have this embed URL, and it's basically just the app URL with a query parameter of embed equals true. This will hide the navigation if you have that turned off for embedding, and just gets rid of that like top bar and the login part. So I'm going to copy that, and that goes right here in the source. So just two steps there. Copy the iframe tag here from the public embed docs, and then replace that embed URL with your app URL. And you'll see that back here on my mock-up of a site here. So I've got a contact section, and the form is embedded, and I've kind of matched the theme and everything. And so I have this connected to Google Sheet. Let me pull that up as well. Okay, so I've got a sheet where I want my contact info to go. I have separately built this real simple contact app. It's already connected to the spreadsheet. And so now you've got this public website. You want to set the app to public as well, because we're embedding it in a public app and the user's not logging in. They're not logging into the public site where we're embedding it, and they're not logging into Appsmith. So this use case is just for submitting data. We're not going to let them query records or edit stuff or see anybody else's data. It just gives them a way to submit a new form on your website. So let's test this out. And we'll click submit and check out the sheet. And there it is. It just added this new row. So we have a public app on a public website here, and it is able to securely capture data from customers and save it back to our own spreadsheet without exposing any credentials or allowing people to edit or delete any data. All right. Well, I think that's everything I wanted to cover for today. We went over the 3 different ways to edit data using a regular form widget, a JSON form, and then the table widgets editing or adding a row feature. And then we looked at how you can validate data. So there's the built-in validation features of each individual widget, or you can use validator.js. And that's going to give you way more options and some more complex functions and specific data types. And then lastly here, we saw how to embed a public app into a public website. We also support embedding private apps on the enterprise plan. So this will allow you to embed your Appsmith app on a internal website or a website that's behind a login, and then pass that login to the Appsmith app so that they're both secure and logged in, and the user doesn't have to log in twice. It'll just be once on your parent application, whatever website that they're logging into there. You can share that into the Appsmith app. So if you're interested in that, again, that's available on the enterprise plan only, and you'll have to add just an extra tag to tell it that you want to pass in the SSO method. So whatever SSO you're using, whether it's OIDC or SAML or Active Directory from any provider, Okta or whatever you're using, that can be seamless, and they'll log into your website and then automatically be logged into that embedded Appsmith app. So that's it for today. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any ideas for future workshops or any questions on this one, feel free to drop a comment below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.